Hey everybody, welcome to another Interstellar Mother. This is now part 2 of my Battlestar Galactica Raptor build. So picking up where we left off here now, I'm assembling the two halves of the ship, but before I put them together, I am adding some extra weight in the nose section, and that's because it's a back-heavy ship with the engines being situated the way they are. It tends to be uneven in the weight, so we're going to have to counteract that. And what I'm doing is I'm placing some epoxy putty. This is a two-part epoxy stuff that you knead together, and I'm just molding it into the front nose section. And once that's done, I'll put the two halves together and allow them to dry. Alright, so these pieces have been left to dry overnight now. I've attached the bottom section and the back part here. And what I want to do right now is step back and see what we have to work with, how this compares to the full-size mock-up. Alright, so here we have a picture, of course, of the full-size mock-up that was used for filming the show. This differs, as we mentioned in the first video, from our model in the sense that our model more represents what we see as a CGI version. I always like to take these pictures, blow them up, have them as a reference. I do photography as a hobby, so I happen to have a bunch of this Costco photo paper here. It's inexpensive, and it's just nice to have them as a reference as you're building your kit. So, what are the differences that we see offhand? So, first thing that strikes me is the front section here. There is no seam on the front section. Our model, of course, will have a seam because of the way it pieces together. You can see there's none of this detailing here. Again, this may be something we see on the CGI version versus the full-size mock-up. Also see this little section that flares out a bit there. I'm not sure I'm going to add that, but we'll see. Alright, and here we have a few more pictures. We've got, of course, the same picture as a larger one, but a close-up section of the nose. The side view here. You can see a closer view of the wing. Obviously, we took care of this seam in the last video. Tail section. You can see how much weathering here is on the upper tail. And what's nice about these, again, is they serve as a good reference in terms of giving you an idea of how to weather your ship. This is the way I want my ship to look. You can see there's a lot of two-toning, there's chipped paint. You can see there's some charring and laser blasts here. The equipment looks worn. The tail section here, we see a lot of blackening, graying of the tail section. Alright, so that's what I'm going to go for. And I have, of course, a picture of my favorite Cylon, which I didn't need to print, but it's nice to have as I'm looking at these reference pictures here. Now, before I move on to painting and all of that fun stuff, what I'd like to do first is to create one more detail and add it to the cockpit. And the detail I'm going to work on is this netting that hangs behind each of the pilot seats. And I figured the seat belts turned out really well, so I'm going to use the same technique there, creating them from masking tape. And I left this piece unattached. It's still not glued in, and this is where we're going to hang that netting from. Alright, so I did a little experimentation with this, and the one thing I'm doing different than the seat belts is I took two pieces of masking tape and put them together so that there's no adhesive on either side. The reason being is it was just too messy to try and get it to sit right. And with the pilots, we wanted the seatbelts to adhere to the pilot's body, obviously. This time we want this hanging freely. So we've got two sets of masking tape again, just plastered against each other there. And so now I'm just cutting out the strips. And let's go ahead and create our netting here. This is how they look now, and I'm leaving these ends open here because this is where I'm going to apply the adhesive so that they can hang from this center brace. So I'm going to go ahead and paint these now in olive green. Alright, and this is after the application of the wash, so I think they're looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and trim this one to the same length as this one here. And the wash I used for this is the MiG Ammo Modern Vehicles wash. And this is how it turned out. I think it looks pretty good. So ready to go ahead and move on now to the model's exterior. Alright guys, well this is where I'm at currently. I went ahead and attached the wings, and then I recalled there was going to be the seam that I needed to address. So sure enough, there is this big seam here, and there's no easy way around it. You're just going to have to apply putty. What I did was to use the Bondo glazing spot putty, and that worked really well. I just put a bunch here and just ran it through with my finger. Applied several applications to that until it was filled in nicely. Allowed it to dry, then sanded it, and you can see I've done both sides now. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the primer to even that out here, and then we'll move ahead with our plan with painting the framing there and the frame around here before we apply our tan colored base coat. Alright, and you can see the window now has been painted, as well as the trim around it. So the next step now is to let this dry thoroughly, and then we'll remask this entire area, including this trim, and then we will begin painting the hull. Alright, as you can see, I've applied some blacks and dark browns here to the surface of the model and prep for the salt technique. Alright, so I know you've seen me do this technique a number of times. Again, the goal is to create this chipped appearance on the surface of our ship. And in order to accomplish it this way, we're going to use hairspray in combination with salt. The hairspray allows the salt to adhere onto the surface, and you can see we've painted these dark colors, and as we apply our base color, we will dissolve the salt away, revealing then the darker colors that you see underneath, and resulting in the effect that we're looking for. The other way to accomplish this is with a chipping solution. The only reason I'm not using this is because you can see the name says heavy chipping. I want a finer appearance. And I've tried this on, or experimented with this, and the effect is pretty pronounced. And so we don't want quite that much weathering there. So they do make solutions that give you a finer appearance. I just haven't gotten them yet, but I do plan to try that in the future. So this is how it's looking. I'm very happy with the way things are going so far. The color turned out great. I'll tell you what I mixed to get this here in a second. But I didn't record any of the salt being taken off because I was doing this before work and I was on limited time, and I just wanted to move quickly on it. What I ended up doing though is removing most of the salt by hand rather than using a toothbrush. The reason is that you know, I wasn't thinking. I ended up applying a generous amount of hairspray throughout the areas I was sprinkling salt, which was okay for what I was after, but on the other hand, I had to be careful with using a toothbrush because any areas that you apply the hairspray to, it's going to make that paint easily removable as you're rubbing it off with your toothbrush. So that did happen here, and I'm glad I started with this section because I didn't want the entire model to look that way. So I'm going to leave it like this because I think it looks okay there. But the rest of it, like I said, I ended up removing by hand and would rub a little harder if I wanted more of the paint to come off. You can see the stippled effect was achieved here with the tail section. And what's next now is to go ahead and coat this with a clear gloss coat. Two things we want to do is apply the decals, and then I also want to apply some other washes, including the MiG Starship wash, just to dirty it up a bit more. I'm also very happy, by the way, with the initial blacks and browns that I applied over the primer because some of that is coming through the paintwork, and I think it adds to a little bit more of to the detailing here by just having done that. So I'm very pleased with the way it's looking so far. Oh, just before I move on here, I just wanted to give you the color mixture that I used for this for the base color. And it's just a 50-50 mix of this khaki brown and tan glaze, both from Vallejo. I was initially going to go with just a khaki brown, but it looked a bit too brown to me. So I happened to have some of this tan glaze on hand, and by adding a little yellow to it, I think it made for a much better color. One other thing I want to replicate here before we apply some washes is to get this sort of splotchy type look. And when you look at footage from the series and you see the full-size mock-up, you see that the hull color is certainly weathered, and you have this sort of multi-color appearance on the surface there. So I want to try and replicate that, and what I'm going to do here is utilize a small little sponge with just a little bit of paint. I've lightened up our color that we use for the hull, and I'm just going to dab very light amounts of this onto the hull. So far it's working out pretty well. I'm not sure you can see in this lighting here, but I'll continue to record here and show you when it's done. Alright, now it's kind of hard to appreciate in this lighting here. Let me see if I can turn it this way, but you can see there are just these light splotches of color here along the surface. So I'm going to also apply maybe some dark splotches as well. Okay, moving on now to utilizing the Starship wash. If you remember how this is used now, you apply it onto the model. And it doesn't look good right now, right? But what you do after it's dry is you take your odorless thinner and you just put some on a brush here, and you can see how you can get this streaking effect. So you can basically manipulate the pigment around and get yourself the look that you're after. So here we're going to give this a more streaked look and just spread this around a bit, and let's just see how it looks when I'm done with that. Alright, and this is the way it turned out. You can see I applied some of the wash here along the inside and where the engines are going to rest, as well as on the back side. So I'm not going to be using the washes extensively, but really what I'm going to be depending on to detail this further is the Tamiya weathering kit. As you know, it comes with this sponge type applicator which can easily be replaced. I just need to get these at the cosmetics section. They're just sponges that you apply eyeshadow with. And I'm going to be using the black and the brown here to darken up some of these corners and edges to accentuate them, but certainly to darken up this intake here and this tail section as well. So as you're applying this type of weathering, you want to do it in a way obviously that makes sense, and so I'm constantly thinking about how the weather or air is affecting the ship I'm detailing. So in this case, we have these sharp corners here that you would think would be affected as wind is rushing across the surface of them, or you're going through an atmosphere. So that is the idea behind, first of all, applying the salt technique to some of these sharper corners. And it really helped to apply that darker pigmentation first before applying your surface coat. And I think the combination of those really works well, and it looks convincing. So that is the idea then now to build on that with the Tamiya weathering kit, and that's the reason why I'm applying some of that pigmentation along here, these corners, just to build on what I've already done. And the next step after this is to go ahead and dry brush. And you don't want to dry brush everything, but particularly areas that are more worn than others, like along here, I'm going to take this paint, dip my brush into it, and just with a small amount of paint on your brush, you really want to dry off your brush on a paper towel, then to apply it, gently brushing along the surface. Now this side has already been done, and you can see some dry brushing along here, and I've already applied some along here, these sharper corners along the base of the window. Here's another example of dry brushing here on this piece. As we saw on our full-size mock-up, it looked pretty worn, and you know, understandably so, because that is the front of the ship, of course. Alright, so I will continue to move along here. We still have some weathering to do on the tail section, and of course the bottom of the ship. Alright, and once this is all done, we'll move on to final assembly of the model. So one other thing I wanted to mention before I start assembling this model is there's this back section that someone had mentioned when they placed it onto their model. There's a bit of a gap down here, okay? And the way to eliminate that gap is simply just to take this L section right here, take your file and just make it a little deeper, because when you place it into the slots as it's originally molded, it's just not deep enough, and so it's left with a gap. But you can see what happens when you do that. It eliminates the gap completely. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and work on the landing gear, a few other odds and ends, and do some finishing touches, and I will show you the completed model in just a second. Alright, so here we now have the completed Battlestar Galactica Raptor. This is a 1/48 scale replica of the ship from Moebius Models. It measures 12 inches in length, 5.5 inches high, and has about a 7-inch wingspan. So let me first make a few comments about the exterior detailing. As you know, I chose to replicate the look seen with the full-size mock-up as opposed to the look of the CGI version, which is what the molded detailing reflects. This required the use of one of the photo etch kits available on the market, and I went with the one from Pair Graphics. So the most notable alterations to the exterior using the kit are the steps you see here on each of the wings. The ones that come with the model are simpler in appearance, while these have finer details. You may also notice here at the front of the ship that I added some tubing to the front sensor, which is completely absent. The model came with no tubing at all. This was done by just using a pin vise to make the 2 holes here, and I just used some solder for the tubing. I first thought about using some insulated wire, but it was just not very easy to bend into shape. So the solder was much easier to work with, and then I just painted it with a dark gray color. And if you followed the video, you know that the exterior weathering was done with a combination of using the salt hairspray technique, the Tamira weathering kit, and some dry brushing, and they were all very helpful in achieving the look I was after. So this time around I was really determined to put a little more effort into addressing seams and gaps. It's not that I haven't done that in the past, but I just really wanted to work a bit harder at it this time around. The 2 things I found helpful was the use of the glazing spot putty from Bondo, and this was really helpful with this heavy seams, especially along the wings and the front intakes. And for some smaller gaps, I used Vallejo's plastic putty, which I basically now call my caulking putty. The stuff easily is applied along any gaps. In this instance, I used the putty for the gaps seen along the cockpit window and where the tail section joins the main body. And I was really satisfied with the end result. I think it helps to make your model look a lot more finished when you do these things. So, turning to the interior, as you know, I decided not to light the ship, which I'm really happy with. It was a relief not to worry about the light leaks, and that's one challenge that you'll find if you decide to do that. Some of the interior doesn't piece as tightly as it should, so there are gaps along the instrument panels, and those will definitely have to be addressed for sure. It's just also a very tight-fitting space, so that's a concern you're going to have if you decide to move forward with lighting. Although I didn't use any of the photo etch for the instrument panels, I did use the ones to help with detailing the steps along the floor and a piece to modify the side bulkhead near the door here. The other thing I found helpful were the painting masks. They were not only helpful with the exterior, but also for detailing the instrument panels. In short, what I did here was to prime the parts white before applying the masks to all the screens and areas that were to have the decals. And in the end, you can see that this technique really helps to accentuate the look of the decals. I did add some other details here, including this netting that you see behind each of the pilots there. You see that on the television show. And this was done just by using masking tape and painting it to the color I wanted. The other thing I did was to also add seat belts to each of the pilots. And lastly, let me just talk about the base here. This was made using a round piece of plastic that I bought from a store called Reddit. This is a place here in San Diego that sells plastic displays and other items. A lot of places that have retail spaces will go here to buy stuff. They often have scrap pieces from things that they've done, and I'll go there every now and then to see what they have. And I bought these round pieces real cheap, and they're just ideal for model bases. My goal here was to create the look of the Galactic landing bay, and to weather it, I decided to try AK Interactive's heavy chipping fluid. So this fluid basically substitutes for the salt hairspray technique, and you can see here it was very effective. So this is something I'd recommend that you try at some point, although I'll still use the salt technique depending on the look that I'm after. I still think in some circumstances you can achieve a finer pattern with the salt. But this again is something that you should give a try. It's not very difficult to use, and I'll be posting a short video tutorial about how to use that stuff shortly. Alright, let me go ahead and rate this kit. I'd give it a fairly high rating. Regarding accuracy, I'd give it 4 out of 5. I know there are deficiencies you can probably easily point out, but I think it makes a decent replica of the ship. Ease of assembly, again 4 out of 5 here. As I mentioned, there are parts that don't quite fit as tightly together, but I really didn't think any of this was unmanageable. Enjoyment, I felt this was a fun kit to put together. I think you'll have fun with it too. And as for cost, I'd have to give it 3 out of 4 dollar signs. I know these kits aren't cheap, but considering the size, I think it's reasonable. This kit runs about $45 or so. Alright guys, well I hope you had fun following along. I do think that if you are a Battlestar Galactic fan, you'll be pretty pleased with this kit. It'll be another great addition to your collection. So if you have any questions, as usual, feel free to comment here or email me at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. Not sure what my next project will be, but it'll come up soon. Until then, take care. Thanks for watching.